You know that feeling, right? When you're just drowning in information, trying to figure out how things connect, maybe at work, maybe just in a group you're part of.
Yeah, it can be totally overwhelming, sorting through everything.
Well, that's exactly what we try to do here on the deep dive. We wade through it all and pull out the nuggets, the really useful bits for you.
And then today, we're digging into some really interesting material you shared, actually. It's from Professional Generalism, specifically a chapter looking at how different bits and pieces, unities, the text calls them,
Unities, right?
how they come together to form different kinds of, well, collections.
And this isn't just theory, is it? I mean, if you're on a team trying to understand workplace politics or even just curious about how stuff gets organized, this can actually give you some real clarity.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the interactions, the goals, the things that really shape what's going on around us. Practical stuff.
So our mission today, our deep dive goal, is to unpack these key ideas about systems, networks, and groups, and especially the different kinds of objectives that make them tick.
Basically giving you a shortcut to grasp these concepts without getting lost in the weeds.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. The source material lays some important groundwork first, talking about how things connect. It mentions exposure.
Uh-huh. Which is essentially just energy transmission. One thing sending something information, energy towards another.
And then there's interaction. That's the response, right? How the receiver actually reacts to that exposure.
Exactly. And the distinction is key. They use that email example. Worker A emails colleague B. The email going out, that's exposure.
But if colleague B is totally snowed under and doesn't even see it,
Then there's no interaction between them at that point. Now, worker A still interacted with their computer, obviously.
but here's a crucial point that text makes. Just because you don't see a reaction doesn't mean zero interaction occurred.
Right. Even if colleague B reads it and consciously decides not to reply immediately, there was an interaction. They processed it, made a judgment.
Yeah, there was an internal response.
Totally, like the radiation example they give. You're exposed, your cells react even if you feel nothing consciously.
Or if someone criticizes you and you choose to say nothing. Outwardly, silence, but inwardly.
That energy definitely had an effect. An interaction happened internally.
Okay, so building on exposure and interaction, we get to unity systems. And this isn't just any old collection of things, is it? There's a pretty precise definition.
There is. The source defines a typical system as, let's see, a collection of two or more unities interacting periodically. That's important.
Periodically,
Okay.
not just randomly.
Right. And they exchange energy to achieve at least one objective. Explicitly agreed and defined objective. The EADO.
EED, explicitly agreed and defined objective. That sounds specific.
It is, and it has to be within a set time frame or on an ongoing basis. The agreement and definition are the core parts.
And this EAD thing, it breaks down further, right? Into
Yeah.
quantity, quality, and time.
Yep, how much, how well, and by when. That's the essence of the objective.
What about cost? Isn't that usually part of an objective?
Interestingly, the source argues cost isn't part of the objective itself. It's seen more as an enabling factor, or maybe a constraint.
Ah, so it affects whether you can achieve the quantity and quality and the time, but it's not defining the what.
Exactly. It limits or enables, but doesn't define the core objective agreement.
And this EADO concept, it lines up pretty well with things like SMART goals, doesn't it?
It really does. Specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, time-bound. A solid EADO hits all those points. The source explicitly makes that connection.
Makes sense. Now, what's the minimum size for a system, theoretically?
Well, the smallest needs 3 unities. 2 that are actually interacting to achieve the EADO, and a third one that facilitates that interaction.
Okay, like a communication channel or something.
Could be, yeah. But the text also stresses that how many unities you count really depends on your focus, the level of abstraction.
Like that car factory example again. From afar, the whole factory is one unity with a big EADO.
But zoom in, and a department becomes the unity, with its own EADO. Zoom further, and it's a worker or a specific machine.
So it's all about perspective. What level are you analyzing?
Precisely. Which leads nicely into boundaries and the environment around the system.
Right, the proximal environment. What's that exactly?
It's the stuff just outside the system that can directly interact with it or send energy its way, or even just could potentially interact or send energy, even if it's not directly involved in the EADO.
Okay, unpack that. The fruit sorting example seemed helpful here.
Yeah, perfect. The workers and the machine sorting fruit, that's the system core, focused on the EADO.
Okay.
But the supervisor giving safety tips, that's active interaction from the environment. The lights overhead, active energy transmission or exposure.
What about the other coworkers nearby?
They represent dormant interaction. They could step in and interact. And the air conditioner. Depending if it's on or off, it's active or dormant exposure. None are sorting fruit, but they're right there influencing things.
Got it. And when energy from that environment, like the light or the supervisor's voice, hits a unity inside the system.
It becomes part of the system's energy. It's incorporated.
And EADOs aren't always about making a physical thing, right?
No, not at all. The source says EADOs can be about creating new unities, sure, but also modifying existing ones or just changing their energy state.
Like learning outcomes at uni. The goal is to change the student's knowledge or understanding their state.
Exactly. Even if that change isn't always easy to see immediately.
And the system's outputs. The sorted fruit, the changed student.
They can stay within the system, maybe for another process, or get transferred out into the environment where they can then interact with other things.
Okay, that paints a pretty clear picture of systems and their EADOs. But you mentioned other types of collections, ones that don't meet this strict definition.
Right. So if you have unities interacting, but it's irregular or random, and crucially, there's no EADO, that's defined as a network.
A network, like people mingling at a conference, lots of random chats.
Perfect example. People interact, share info, but everyone has their own agenda, their own goals. There's no single agreed objective for the whole crowd.
Okay, so networks, random interaction, no EADO. What else?
Then there's a group. Here, the interaction is periodic, it's regular. But, like a network, there's still no overarching EADO that they've all agreed on.
A group, like a class of students. They meet regularly.
Exactly. They interact in lectures, maybe tutorials. But usually, the learning objectives are set for them by the institution or teacher. They haven't typically formed a collective EAD amongst themselves.
But if a few students in that class form a study group for a specific project and agree on what they want to achieve together,
then that subgroup becomes a system with its own EADO.
interesting distinction. And there was one more. Atypical systems.
Ah, yes. That's where you have irregular or random interactions, like a network, but there is an EADO.
So back to the conference.
Yeah.
If two people chatting randomly suddenly decide, hey, let's collaborate on this specific project and define what they'll do.
That conversation or that emerging partnership momentarily becomes an atypical system.
Okay. And networks can be subtle too, like just looking at a poster.
Yeah. You interact with the poster, get information, exposure, but your objective for looking might be totally different from the poster creator's objective. No shared EADO there, just individual goals. So it's a network interaction.
What about us and our devices? Watching the news every night, or my tablet, syncing data constantly.
Often that falls under group. The interaction is periodic. You watch the news daily. The tablet syncs regularly. But you haven't agreed on an objective with the TV station or the server farm. It's kind of a one-way definition of goals or just routine interaction.
Though the source mentioned AI might change that down the line.
Right. Potential for more sophisticated AI where maybe you could collaboratively define objectives. But for most current tech, it's more like a group interaction.
And didn't the source have a table summarizing all this?
It did, yeah. Really helpful visual. Basically plots interaction type periodic or random against whether there's an EADO or not. Makes it easy to see the 4 categories. Typical system, atypical system, group, and network.
Useful. Now these collection systems, groups, networks, they don't exist in isolation, do they?
Not at all. Big point in the source. Larger collections contain smaller ones, subsystems within systems, subgroups within groups. You get the idea.
And whether we call something a unity or a system just depends on our focus again.
Exactly. That zoom lens idea. Look at the whole car. The engine is just a unity within the car system aiming to get you somewhere, an EADO.
But zoom right into the engine.
And suddenly, a single combustion chamber might be the collection you're analyzing, with its own internal interactions and objective of combustion.
It's about defining your level of analysis.
And crucially, one thing, one unity, can be part of multiple collections at the same time.
How so?
Think about the chips inside your computer monitor. They're part of the monitor's internal system or network, right? Helping display an image.
Okay.
But then the whole monitor, including those chips, forms another collection with you when you're using it. You and the monitor interact maybe as a group, periodic use, no shared EADO, or even a temporary system if you have a very specific, agreed task involving it.
Ah, so nested collections. And the same component playing different roles.
Precisely. Different interaction patterns, different objectives, depending on the level you're looking at.
Okay, so systems need EADOs. Networks and groups don't. But we still operate with expectations in those other situations, right?
Yeah,
Especially interacting with the wider world or just in a casual network.
absolutely. And that's where the next concept comes in. Explicitly expected and trusted objectives, or EATOs.
EETOs, explicitly expected. Okay, how are these different from EADOs?
Well, the key difference is agreed versus expected. EATOs are formally agreed upon. EATOs are more like the shared normative expectations we have, even without a direct agreement. They're often bidirectional, like EATOs, but based on norms, laws, policies, standard practices.
So the unwritten rules,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah.
Or sometimes written, like laws.
Exactly. And the source is clear. Systems have EATOs by definition. EETOs apply more to groups, networks, and our interactions with the environment, especially the distant environment we don't directly agree with.
Can you give an example?
Sure, buying that monitor again. You don't have a signed EADO contract with the manufacturer about how it should work.
No, definitely not.
But there's an ETO. You expect it to turn on and display a picture based on consumer laws and general market standards. And the seller or manufacturer implicitly expects you to use it normally, not, dunk it in water.
Right, those background expectations underpinned by frameworks.
Frameworks or even just social norms, like you expect people to queue politely. That's an ETO arising from social interaction, not usually a formal rule, going to the library unspoken ETOs about quiet behavior.
Okay. And these EDOs can influence smaller groups or systems within a larger context.
Yeah.
You mentioned moderated interactions.
Yes. Imagine a big company. Its overall EADO might be something huge, like maximize shareholder value. That's too broad for the day-to-day.
Right. How does the marketing team use that directly?
They probably don't. Instead, senior management sets company policies or strategic directions. These function as ETOs for the departments.
Ah, so the overarching goal gets translated into expectations.
Exactly. And then the marketing department takes that ETO, like increase market share in sector X, and develops its own specific agreed EADO, like launch 3 campaigns targeting sector X by Q3.
So the ETO from the higher level guides the creation of EADOs at the lower level.
Ideally, yes, aiming for alignment. But the source does caution that as objectives flow down through layers, they can get filtered or transformed. It's not always a perfect one-to-one transmission. There might be gaps.
Okay, that covers agreed objectives, EEDOs,
Yeah.
and expected ones,
Yeah.
EEDOs. But there's still more going on under the surface, isn't there? Our own personal goals.
Definitely. And that brings us to the third type. Implicitly assumed and trusted objectives, IATOs.
IATOs, implicitly assumed. So these are the internal ones, the ones we don't necessarily talk about.
Pretty much. They're your personal ambitions, expectations, assumptions that you hold within a collection alongside any formal EATOs or shared EATOs. Just because a team agreed on Project Goal X doesn't mean you don't also have an IATO about getting a promotion out of it.
And these IATOs, they can sometimes surface?
They can. If you voice your IATO, I think we should also aim for Y, and others accept it. The source suggests it can actually become an EET, a shared expectation.
But what if it's rejected? If you suggest aiming for Y and the team says no, or not right now,
Then it becomes what the source calls an Unsettled Side Objective, or USO. It's been voiced, but not adopted. Yet, it hasn't vanished entirely. It sticks around as long as someone still supports it, potentially influencing things from the sidelines.
wow, okay, so we've got this whole ecosystem. EATOs agree,
Yeah.
ETOs expected, IATOs assumed internal, and USOs voiced but shelved.
And they're all interconnected. They influence each other constantly through the energy exchange, the interactions happening in the collection. An unmet ETO might surface someone's hidden IATO, for example.
That HR recruiter example seemed to pull all these together.
It did. The EADO is clear. Find candidates for the client. Simple enough.
But then there are ETOs.
Yep. Like the client expects the recruiter's staff to be competent, an ETO based on professional standards, and there are legal ETOs about fair hiring practices.
And the recruiter's own IATO.
Maybe it's just hoping to get the contract renewed with the client. That's likely an internal assumption driving their actions.
And where do the job applicants fit in?
They have IATOs too, like hoping for useful feedback if they're rejected. But the recruiter might have no EADO to provide that feedback.
And maybe even a conflicting, unspoken EADO with the client about finding a very specific type of candidate, which clashes with fair hiring ETOs and the applicant's IATOs.
Exactly. It shows how complex and sometimes conflicting these different objective layers can be.
Even a basic employment contract has these layers, right?
Totally. Your job description has EADOs, specific tasks. There are EAOs around general performance or company values, and you likely have IATOs, like expecting your manager to give you timely warnings about deadlines, even if that's not written down anywhere.
And those IATOs, while not part of your formal review, still color the day-to-day interactions.
For sure. And over time, maybe that IATO about warnings could become an ETO through conversation.
The bus commuter example was good too. Passengers have EETOs about safe driving,
And IATOs about getting there on time.
while the driver has EETOs about passengers following rules like no eating.
All stemming from the Transport Authority's broader EADOs about providing reliable service.
Yeah.
And those posts are saying no food or drink. Those are stated ETOs.
Which become USOs if everyone just ignores them.
Right. And if someone does eat violating the ETO, it can trigger an interaction where the driver's IATO, maybe keep the bus clean, and the passenger's IATO, I'm hungry, come right out.
Okay, this framework of EADOs, EATOs, IATOs, USOs,
Mm-hmm.
it feels much more nuanced than just saying everyone needs a common goal.
And that's a key point the source makes. A lot of management books talk about shared understanding or common purpose as defining a system.
But the source argues those are often too fuzzy, too much like EATOs or IATOs.
Exactly. They can be hard to pin down, hard to objectively test. Are we really sharing the same understanding? How do we know for sure?
Whereas an EATO being explicitly agreed and defined.
Provides a much clearer test. Do we have one? Yes. Okay. Likely a system. Typical or atypical? No. Then it's probably a network or group. It's a more rigorous way to differentiate.
Like the two cars driving. They both want safety, maybe a shared high-level goal, an ETO from traffic laws,
Yeah.
but their destinations are different.
Right. No shared specific EABO about where they are going together. So they aren't a system relative to each other, even though they share the road and follow the same rules, ETOs, and maybe have IATOs about courtesy.
So just to quickly recap the main collection types for everyone listening.
You've got systems defined by having at least one explicitly agreed and defined objective, EADO. Interactions are usually periodic, but can be irregular, atypical systems.
The network's interactions are irregular or random, and crucially, no EADO.
And groups' interactions are periodic, but still no EADO.
And really paying attention to the type of objective at play, agreed, expected, or just assumed, being critical for clarity.
Huge takeaway. It helps you understand what's actually driving things, what commitments exist versus what are just hopes or norms.
And thinking about how these parts depend on each other.
And maybe changing how you interact depending if it's a system needing EADO focus or a network needing navigation of IATOs.
Plus that idea of zooming in and out, changing your perspective to see the different levels.
Definitely. It gives a much richer picture.
So a final thought for you listening. Think about the different collections you're in. Which ones are really systems with clear EADOs? And where could looking for those underlying EEOs or IATOs explain some of the dynamics you see?
Yeah, or maybe reflect on a time an IATO you held, something you assumed, either became an agreed thing, an EADO or EADO, or maybe it got shot down and became a USO. What did that whole process teach you about how these collections actually work?
We really hope you'll take these concepts and just sort of look around with them, use them as a lens on your own teams, your workplace, even just social situations.
It might offer a really fresh way to understand what's going on.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you a clearer perspective.
Until next time.